Dimitri Soudas, former director of communications for the Harper government, now political commentator. And Dimitri, I want to start off with a story we have not talked about this afternoon, but I hear is now being talked about. Mark Carney's name has resurfaced, and this is happening in the midst, of course, of what looks like a bit of the kids fighting. So Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, apparently had a bit of a disagreement from what we know, and we don't know a lot. So what do you make of all this?
So here's what we do know about the disagreement. Chrystia Freeland in the last budget and over the last few months has doubled down on saying the guardrail, meaning the deficit will not go beyond $40 billion. And then the Prime Minister went on another spending spree, a spending spree that, the GST holiday, the $250 check that is also being reworked on now. Then there's additional money that they have to put into securing the border because of the latest threat by President Trump. But they've also still not passed. So they increased capital gains exemptions. They increased the capital gains tax, which means additional revenue for the government of Canada. So, Aaron, this still has not passed Parliament. Therefore, they cannot count on the additional revenue, yet the additional expenses are piling on. And when the Minister of Finance, is going increasingly uncomfortable, and we will witness that on Monday, she will have to deliver an economic update, which is late in the stage of when the economic update actually needs to be delivered, that will project a deficit at almost $50 billion. So the $40 billion benchmark guardrail that she promised has been shattered. No additional revenue coming in, additional expenses on the line. Now, Mark Carney has resurfaced yet again. Why has he resurfaced? Well, based on my discussions with people very close to the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister is trying at all costs to convince Mark Carney to join the Liberal cabinet. Join the Liberal cabinet. In some instances, they've told me that this is a position that they've crafted U.S.-Canada ministry relations, which is not a real ministry. The real dilemma for Justin Trudeau is, does he bump Chrystia Freeland, because Mark Carney apparently is saying it's finance or nothing, or is he able to convince Mark Carney to take on the role of Minister of Foreign Affairs? And there he has the dilemma, he being Prime Minister Trudeau, does he bump Mélanie Joly? But I do know for a fact that he desperately wants and is trying to convince Mark Carney to take a cabinet position. Why is Carney playing hard to get? Very simple. He wants to replace Justin Trudeau. And in his eyes, joining a sinking ship will tarnish and will have an impact on his ability to not necessarily become Liberal leader, but then Pierre Poilievre, who's going to stick him on, well, you were part of Justin Trudeau's team, and you're part of the problem.
All right, let me go back to a couple of things. So you just kind of threw out there now that you believe that number is $50 billion. Where's that coming from?
So that's coming from all these new expenditures, GST holiday, the $250 check. There will be additional money in the fiscal update with a plan, quote unquote. We'll see what that plan looks like as it relates to securing the border. So there's billions of dollars being spent. There's billions of dollars of anticipated revenue that's not coming in because, for example, on the capital gains tax, which the Liberal government raised, both on businesses and individuals, that still hasn't passed Parliament. So if you do the math, these new additional expenses, without the additional revenue, means that the government is overspending now by almost $50 billion and not overspending by the $40 billion that the Minister of Finance committed would not go beyond.
So let me ask this question, though. I understand about the capital gains tax not having been, of course, approved yet. We haven't gotten to that stage. What about the money that they're going to be spending or putting out, that $250, the GST credit? Has that been passed?
So GST credit has passed. It passed last week. The $250 did not pass because the NDP said we will not be supporting this. And my view right now is they're trying to recraft this to make another deal yet again with the NDP, which means more expenditures, more spending in order to, what some would say is, survive politically. I do want to get back on the GST, though, and the GST may end up costing more than what they anticipated. Why? Because certain provinces are saying, well, you promised this. We're not really willing to do this, so you need to compensate us. And that's specifically for provinces that have harmonized the GST with a provincial sales tax, being the HST. Quebec is not one of them.
Right.
Luckily, Ontario has said, no, we'll do this too.
Okay. Let me move on from that and talk about the other story that we spent some time talking about today. The big meeting between Chrystia Freeland, Dominic LeBlanc, and provincial premiers yesterday in answer to what Canada will do to the Trump tariffs, and of course specifically to this threat of, if you don't fix your borders, we're going to have these tariffs. Did anything coherent come out of this? Because my favorite clip today is when Dominic LeBlanc was simply asked, okay, can we have some details? When are we going to know? And Dominic LeBlanc basically didn't have much of an answer except for this.
It'll roll out when it rolls out.
That's it. That's all I got. It'll roll out when it rolls out. So what happened yesterday from what you've heard, and what's going on?
So I actually agree with what Dominic LeBlanc just said. It will roll out when it rolls out. Why? Because in politics, just like in anything else that we do, you do strategy. You don't talk strategy. So last night, premiers met. As you know, Doug Ford is out there, Premier of Ontario, threatening to turn off the switch and no longer provide energy to the United States, which is not exactly the brightest idea. Then you have premiers of Alberta and the Premier of Quebec. Actually, François Legault and Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, are pretty much well aligned on this, which means let's prepare a robust response. Let's look at counter tariffs. Let's try and see if we can renegotiate the Canada-U.S. free trade agreement sooner than scheduled, because currently it's scheduled to be renegotiated in 2026. Let's move that up, and let's consider the possibility of doing it bilaterally, i.e. excluding Mexico from the negotiations, and Mexico can negotiate its own deal with the United States. So the government yesterday said the premiers were happy, they were content. What the premiers are saying is, well, we don't really know what the plan is. Now, I can't necessarily blame the government of Canada for not putting out their full plan to the provincial governments. Why? Because it's like they're telling the whole country. And right now, every move, every strategy decision that they make, and we'll see if it pays off dividends. Because ultimately, what's the objective? On January 20th or 21st, Donald Trump cannot pick up a pen and sign an executive order that will impose 25% tariffs on the Canadian economy. Why? Well, that's going to cause damage to our GDP by 1%, and that means Canada can plunge into a recession. So I think everybody's really nervous right now as to whether or not he's actually going to do this, and then how's Canada going to retaliate? Will there be counter tariffs? It's going to be rock and roll for the next 4 years with this president. There's no doubt about it, Aaron.
I'm just, with respect to this thing about it'll roll out when it rolls out. I mean, the question from the reporter was, can we get some details? So no details provided by Dominic LeBlanc, but literally, a few hours later, you have Danielle Smith saying, hey, you know what? Alberta has decided on its own to spend $29 million to increase border patrols in its province. So I'm trying to understand here, if this is a Team Canada approach, what are individual provinces doing, taking their own actions?
So provinces are obviously panicking, especially Alberta. Alberta exports more than $130 billion a year of crude oil to the United States. Just on crude oil, that accounts for 25% of Canada's exports into the United States. The reason that provinces are panicking is very simple. At the end of the day, Donald Trump hates Justin Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau hates Donald Trump. We cannot avoid that reality. These two men are so far apart ideologically, they keep insulting each other. Just yesterday or before yesterday, I don't know why. I don't know what got into him. The Prime Minister decided to give a speech and basically tell Americans, you're a bunch of idiots for electing Donald Trump, and women's rights all of a sudden are going backwards, and you should have voted for Kamala Harris. You can't out-Trump Donald Trump. You need to focus on things that are going to make him move. What's going to make him move? Well, if he imposes 25% tariffs on crude oil, for example, which would be encompassed, that's literally going to increase energy prices in the United States, which goes counter to his commitment to reduce energy prices. So where we've screwed up, and when I say we, the government of Canada, is we actually have not taken the issue of securing our border seriously. There's one border crossing. It's not an official border crossing in Scranton, where the amount of illegals coming in from Canada into the United States is at 20,000 in 2024. That is more than the sum of the last 17 years. So on the issue of the border, while the Americans also have a responsibility, we have lost control.
But I heard a number today, actually from Dominic LeBlanc, saying that represents 0.6% of those who cross the border into the U.S. Is that not an accurate figure?
It is an accurate figure. The big part of the problem is Mexico. But at the end of the day, they're not looking at percentages. What they're looking at is
raw numbers.
20,000 just in 2024. That amounts for the amount of illegals coming in from Canada into the United States for the last 17 years. And if that pattern continues, obviously it's going to increase. And that's what's troubling to the U.S. administration. I
want to ask you one last question. I read John Bolton today gave an interview and suggested, so he's the former national security advisor in the Trump presidency, at least for a while anyway, for about a year, who said, you know what, Canada's approach to Donald Trump should be deferential. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I think, though, we need to hit the Americans where it hurts. They rely on us for energy. They rely on us for steel. They rely on us for aluminum. They rely on us for a bunch of things. And then we can also impose strategic tariffs on products like bourbon, for example. Republican states that export products into Canada, and by being strategic about it, we're going to be able to put some pressure of some sort for Donald Trump to basically back off this threat. But at the same time, Aaron, we cannot say that he is wrong to be concerned with what's going on at the Canadian border.
That's where we'll leave it. All right, Dimitri, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.